In 2005, I was a trendsetter. A few years before it seemed like everyone lost their jobs, I lost mine. So I was a little bit ahead of the curve, and so before everyone started cutting back and saving money, that's what my family decided that we had to do. So as part of that cutting back and saving money in around 2005, 2006, I thought, because I'm a person who I really got to have a vacation to look forward to. Even if it's just a really simple vacation, it's really nice to have something to look forward to, a getaway, something like that. So I decided that the solution to that would be camping. So we decided that we would try one night. My husband was a little skeptical. He grew up camping. I did not. He saw it as a bunch of work. I saw it as this wonderful communing with nature kind of wonderful thing, camping. So we decided we'd try it for one night. So we went to Highlands, North Carolina, a beautiful place. We were meeting friends there from around the country. A few of them came. And so we had with us in total a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, an 18-month-old, and a 6-month-old. I think that's all. What could go wrong, right? Well, it rained. And not only did it rain, it poured. That steady rain that if you've gone camping, you remember hearing it on your tent and thinking, no, what are we going to do? So it rained and it rained and it rained. Water started coming into our tent. We've since exchanged that tent for a new tent that does not leak. But it started coming in our tent, and I thought, well, this is miserable and ridiculous. We're not going to camp. But then that next morning, by some miracle, we got some sleep, and we woke up the next morning, and we had missed out the night before on the very best part of camping, which is, of course, s'mores. We couldn't make them the night before because we couldn't make a fire. So that next morning, we got up, and my husband had, because he had camped before, he put the wood in the car so it wouldn't get wet. So we got it out and made a fire, and we had breakfast s'mores. And if there's anything better than breakfast s'mores, tell me what it is on a camping trip. It was the best thing. And my kids, who are very little on this trip, they still remember as a legend, and they'll still bring it up sometimes, breakfast s'mores. That one time that mommy lost her mind and said, it's okay to have s'mores for breakfast. That moment when we were camping and we had the breakfast s'mores after that horrible night, and the kids were running around and the babies were playing in the dirt, and I thought, this is what camping is about. Maybe we do camp after all. Because of that one moment with the breakfast s'mores, it made it all worth it. All of the packing in the rain and all those kinds of things. There are those moments when you say, oh, this is what it's supposed to be. It is nice to be outside and be away from it all and all those kinds of things. Now, when I tell people this, they have two reactions, and I'm sure you fall into one of the camps. And one of them is, I love to camp, it's great. And the second is, I don't camp. And that might be lots of you. I get that reaction a lot. Or, camping for me is the Holiday Inn. I've heard a few, camping for me is the Mariettas, which, I mean, come on. Camping for some of you is RVs, and I think that's fine. It's still getting away from it all. However it works out, camping's a good thing. But I didn't know until a little while ago, and this is bad news for those of you who think the Holiday Inn is camping, there's a place in the Bible where God actually says, thou shalt camp. I'm not kidding. Thou shalt camp. It's a long time ago in the Bible. It's in Leviticus, so you may not have read it, because why? It's Leviticus. But it's back there. It's right after God had led the people of Israel out of slavery. God had led them out of Egypt through the Red Sea, parted the sea. The people went across. Pharaoh's army died. It's this great story. They went to the end. They danced. They were celebrating. And then they lived in tents for 40 years. They camped for 40 years. So when they were done with the camping, when God led them into the promised land, one of the first things God did was God said, thou shalt camp. Once every year for 7 days to remember that I brought you out of the wilderness, and while you were in the wilderness, I gave you absolutely everything that you needed. I gave you water when you needed it. Moses hit a rock with a stick and water came out. When you needed food, I made it rain manna down from heaven, and you had enough to eat. I made quails come out so that you could eat the birds, so that you could even have meat when you needed it. God gave them everything they needed when they were in the wilderness and camping. And so when they were done with that, God said, I want you to remember. I want you to remember that I'm a God who'll give you everything you need. Not necessarily everything you want, but everything that you need. So thou shalt camp for 7 days. It's in the Bible, remember this. But I think this is what Peter was thinking about during the Transfiguration. He had all that history behind him. He was thinking about that God had commanded them to camp 7 days every year out of this gratefulness to God, out of this knowing that God would take care of them no matter what. So when Peter was thinking about that and Jesus was transfigured in front of them and there was this beautiful, it said they were bleached, his clothing were bleached, whiter than anybody on earth could bleach them. And he saw Moses and he saw Elijah and they're having this wonderful vision and spiritual experience. Why wouldn't Peter say, this is just like what God told us? We should camp right here. We should set up our tents because what else would we need other than the presence of God up here on this mountain? Sometimes Peter gets a bad rap for saying this. And even in the Gospel of Mark, the writer kind of editorializes and says, well, he didn't know what he was saying. He wasn't sure because they were all so scared. But I think Peter knew exactly what he was saying. He was remembering that festival and remembering that when you feel really, really grateful to God, you pitch your tent right there. You move into your tent because God's going to give you everything you need. Because if you've seen the presence of God right there, transfigured in front of you, what else are you possibly going to need? So this is good news, though, for those of you who don't camp or who camp in the Holiday Inn, because this is Jesus. And after Peter suggests that what they should do right then is that they should take 7 days and they should go on a camping trip and they should make this tent here and this tent here and this tent here and they should just move in and live there in the presence of God. This is Jesus, and he doesn't have time for a camping trip. Jesus knows it's time to go back down off the mountain, out of that beautiful experience, down off the mountain, and go towards the cross, because that's where he knows he's headed. He's had this beautiful experience, and hopefully that's enough to carry him through and to carry the disciples through all the way to Easter, all the way to the cross, and then the hope of Easter morning. But it's not time yet for that camping trip. It's not time to set up their tents quite yet because Jesus has to go back down into the valley. He has to go back down, and so do we. We start Lent this week, and whatever your discipline is, it probably has something to do with simplicity. That's what I love about camping. I wouldn't ever suggest that all of Holy Trinity, all 639 of us or 1,300 of us or whatever, would go on a camping trip for all of Lent. God might, but I wouldn't. But that's kind of what it is. When you go camping, you got to leave your stuff behind. Sometimes you leave indoor plumbing behind, even. I've heard some stories this weekend about true primitive camping, where you leave the indoor plumbing and you carry in your own water, and you do without, because you know there's really only a few things that you need. And that's what Lent is for taking a look at your life and saying, what do I need? What do I really need? There are lots of things that we want, but what do we need? And here's the other good news. This is what the disciples needed. They had this beautiful vision up on the mountaintop. Peter wants to stay right there. He wants to make the tents. He wants to go on that camping trip out of gratefulness to God. But you know what? It all fell away. And when it all fell away, it was only Jesus right there in front of them. Only Jesus. That's what it says. And I think that's our message from this whole text, from this camping trip that God commands us to be on for all of Lent, figuratively, if not literally, to pare down to those things that we really need. But in the end, to know that it all falls away, all of it. all the transfiguration and even all of that, it falls away until all you see is only Jesus.